Hi, this is Travis Paulin with Integrated Research, and we'll be beginning this webinar here shortly.
Hi, Travis. We're going to be live in about 35 seconds. Travis?
Yeah, can you see my screen?
I can, but yeah, so yeah, that looks better. Okay, so I think we'll kick off. My name is Stephen Elliott. I'm the APAC Marketing Director for IR, and today we'll be talking through call recording assurance, the risk and compliance issues. Travis Pollin will be our presenter with over 20 years experience in the UC and contact center space. He's a senior consultant here at IR. You are able to ask questions, and we'll be running through, we have an hour, but we probably have about 10 minutes for questions at the end. So please make sure you ask any questions as we go along. And Travis, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, well, thank you. So I'm actually the Senior Product Manager for Contact Center and Call Recording Assurance, and thank you for taking the time to attend today's webinar. This will be very informational and so forth. If you've got questions, as some housekeeping got questions, please enter them into the chat window. We will take those questions at the end. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we will do our best to answer them at the end of the call. So let's talk about call recording assurance, which is really right around the risk and compliance area of your contact center or trading environment. And so one of the key things is understanding what is driving the call recording or the assurance part of call recording in the industry today. And one of the key things that we have is around the compliances that are driving this globally. And one of the key, with that, there are a number and scopes of regulations and requirements that are really facing contact centers and financial trading institutions, and they're increasingly global. We're finding new laws coming in place in Europe, new laws coming in place in the United States, as well as other parts of the world in regulating the actual trades or businesses that are conducting various transactions in the industry. So with that, with this global compliances, some of them, for example, in the U.S., that's actually affecting the various institutions around the world, is really in the wake of the new regulation, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform and the Consumer Protection Acts. These are particularly driving financial institutions, the U.S., Europe, and Asia, and they're all looking at how to best monitor the transactions of voice conversations and ensure that the activities of their traders in the contact centers are being tracked, those recordings are auditable, and they can be retrieved at any point 1, 2, 3, or 5 years post the event if it need to be go back in time to actually look at this stuff. So as we see in the emerging trends really that's being driven by compliances, that the industry is actually moving from really, a partially recording, for quality management, all the way to 100% recording for compliance and management. So typical systems that have been running in the contact center for many, many years around quality assurance have been forced to drive to 100% recording requirements. This increase is really the retention periods for each of the captured interactions are also going well beyond typical quality management archiving. So typical things in the past have been, keeping storage for 3 or 6 months. Now 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7 years are now becoming the requirement for these compliance regulatory laws to be able to retrieve. This is putting a huge burden on not only storage requirements, but ensuring that nothing happens to those recordings for longer periods of time. We're also seeing additional trends where there's a higher focus particularly around performance management as the, as the root methodology to ensure really what really is the root cause of a problem, such as a recording not occurring or being able to be tracked or audited. And so a lot more focus has been addressed to this in the organizations, as well as other parts of organizations are becoming more in tune. So it's not just an IT issue, it is an operations, it is a compliance issue, it is a legal issue, and they're all got their eyes on this. And the last piece, really which is driving a lot of attention is that there's an assistance through documentations and reporting on the compliance or the lack of compliance. So being able to determine and be able to come back to the authorities to let them know when recordings haven't occurred, or if you've got a recording beyond the retention period, which could be a legal issue, and be able to identify those sooner or later and then report on it is becoming an increasing trend. However, with all of this, really is driving, you've got the cost of compliance, and these are increasing for financial institutions with new infrastructures and so forth, but also that there is an increased cost of non-compliance. And the cost of this non-compliance is becoming quite considerable. And we'll go over a little later some of these things that have actually occurred in the headlines. However, the risks associated with non-compliance can really result in substantial costs that are directly monetary. These are fines, settlements, from lawsuits and so forth. And we saw that through various organizations and financial institutions and contact centers around the globe. But also, which is an ongoing cost, is the indirect costs and damages to the business's public image and the reputation. Those can be much higher than the fines and settlements that occur. So let me give you some particular examples in the market that actually is driving these things. This is kind of scattered around the globe a bit. So it was recently, in the foreign exchange market, investigations in 2004 conducted with Lord Grabiner, the Bank of England, that there were actually a lot of issues and millions of documents could not be retrieved or tracked. And there's a complete document that was just released a few months ago on the discovery. In that, it was also an analysis that the systems of financial institutions are just really not prepared fully to really handle this level of granular tracking and retrieval and auditing mechanisms for such large-scale financial institutions. Some of these financial institutions, or even if your customers or your institution, you could have hundreds of thousands of calls even a day that must be tracked and recorded and audited. And that becomes quite difficult and expensive, but it also, from a human resource perspective. However, and I'm going to throw this up, then you may relate to this. These are two quotes from customers around the globe, and you may relate to this. That one is that if we ever need a recording that was lost, we'll make front pages to the Wall Street Journal. Another customer also relates that the trading floors make over 250,000 calls per day, and I need to record every single one. Otherwise, I'm out of a job. So these are, they go down from, overall organizational impacts to real individual impacts in this, as personal as you see, I'm out of a job. In some parts of the world, for example, in South Africa, not only the fines are per in particular incident, they're roughly about what they call about 1 million rand or 100,000 US per incident, but can also attach up to 10 years of imprisonment for the individual that was found out to be resulting in that lost recording or violation of the regulatory law. So you can see that more than just a job could be impacted for the individual. Now, this is not comprehensive around the globe, but you may find some of these particular compliances may relate to you in your region. Some of these are in the U.S., some are around the EU, South Africa, Asia, and so forth. And you can see that the financial industry has the highest amount, and this is, like I said, not comprehensive, but you can see from Dodd-Frank, PCI, DSS, and so forth, that you can actually get quite a substantial amount of not just one regulatory compliance, but multiple, depending on the line of business or the function of the contact center or trading floor. If you work your way across, you can see that the other compliance laws have similar requirements around the recording and retention of communications, events, and transactions that occur. And those of you, maybe familiar with the U.S., they also have things, for example, to be able to record when actual transactions, such as even the telcos, have changed or moved, customers from one telco to the next, and so forth, to prevent slamming, and those things have to be tracked. Financial institutions does have the largest impact on regulatory compliances, but you do have those within the point of sale, and insurance, healthcare, and so forth. So some of these particular things here, when we look through these particular financial exposures, is you really have quite a huge expense as it relates to the fines and settlements. This is a very small snapshot, and these are out of headlines, so this is public information. But you can see that from the Security and Exchange Commission's $5,000, $25,000, up to $1 million a day are fines related to the mishandling of trader information. HIPAA, the UK Treaty Customers Fairly Act, and so forth. These actual fines are quite substantial. They're way more than the cost of people trying to manually check to see. And typically with these fines, and you pull any of these particular firms, law firms up and financial institutions, they really were focused around an event that occurred when they went to go retrieve it. And usually the retrieval was 6 months, 12 months, or longer from the time that event occurred. Either the recording was not there, or if they did find the recording, it was not of quality to be used. And many of these kind of situations have caused not the ability, but the inability for the organization to justify what has happened, and to prevent particular fines or violations of particular laws. And so and then we're going to move over to, so that actually gives us our global compliances around the world. Like I said, there are quite a few of these probably in your region that are more specific into your country. They are particularly country and industry specific. And these are really driving, and I'm sure you're asking yourself, who in your organization is finding these things important. It really is. It comes down to who's actually staying up in the middle of the night and worrying about, is the call recording platform, do I have recordings for my branch office in Singapore, or my financial office in Florida in the U.S., or in Germany or Tel Aviv, or Dubai. And those folks are worrying about that. So the question then is, how do you sleep at night? Well, as part of this is to give you kind of an education around also what does prognosis do in this particular thing. And this is really, you can look at it from a product perspective, but you can also look at it from what are you doing in the organization, even if it's manual and not necessarily bringing a particular software like prognosis in, but what are you doing to remediate or reduce the risk associated with missed calls or having calls beyond the retention periods and so forth in your infrastructure. So we're going to go through a various set of about the product, and then the life cycle of actually assuring that calls are being recorded, and then we'll end up with some open questions that can be asked between compliances and particularly the product itself. So when we go through this, the first thing is kind of give you an overview of what particularly is around the product suite. How is it built? And it's really built around some specific concepts. And like I said, these concepts you can take beyond just a software such as Prognosis Call Recording Assurance and look inside your organization to see how mature and how mature is your organization handling these various aspects of it, and relate back to that. So when we look at this, you can see this looks like a Lego box, and if we look at this really from the bottom up, is we got to start with the basics. From infrastructure, is the infrastructure that is it sound? Is it operating as intended? I mean, this is the boxes, the servers, the network, all the way down to blips and bleeps like processes and network traffic. Is it actually working? That's the first level of assuring that the environment is ready to go and can be recorded, and we're going to meet the requirements from those regulatory compliances for the lines of business that must have recordings being established. The next area in looking at this, if we look from the bottom up, is around the configuration. The most common areas that we find in violations with these recording platforms, and either they're not performing well or your recordings are missing, is misconfigurations. The configurations between the agents and traders and who should or should not be recorded based on the particular compliance rules or policies against what it actually is configured between the PBX's trading floor turrets and the call recording platforms themselves. That misconfiguration or disjointed between these parts of the ecosystem tends to be the most complicated area, the most common area that recordings get missed when they go through the ecosystem and so forth. So when you look at that, is how well are you handling, managing operations and so forth when these things are changing in your environment. And when we look at this, the next steps up from this particular area is what is the voice infrastructure part of it? So we are recording voice calls, or these are transactions over the phone, so inbound and outbound conversations that are going on that must be tracked. What are we really doing that? So we really need to understand and monitor in real time your Avaya contact center, your Avaya ecosystem, not just contact center, the Cisco ecosystem and contact center, as well as the financial trading turrets themselves. They all interconnect together in some organizations. Some are actually pretty isolated in those. But man, this is the actual area that's traveling the conversation. So it isn't just checking them off, but how well are you actually managing and monitoring the performance, availability, and the quality of service and experience that's occurring at that particular level. When you've got that as a basis or a foundation of the ecosystem, think of that as just that's the piping in the ecosystem. Now we need to really see how well are we monitoring, and how your organization is actually monitoring in the actual recordings themselves. And so the two separate boxes that are in the middle here really allows us to look at real-time active monitoring. And this is really seeing every single call that's coming in or out has been recorded in the environment, in the system. And also the quality of that call all the way down to the agent or trader's endpoint, all the way to also to the actual recorders or loggers themselves. And make sure that the audio on both sides are actually being delivered as the ecosystem is designed to do. And then from there is to ensure that the recordings actually physically exist on the recorders as well as the long-term archives. Because, one thing is, from our product, we don't trust either the voice center or the call recording platforms. So the question is, what is your source of truth? Where do you actually validate that the recording is actually physically there? So some organizations have various people that are scheduled that log in throughout the day, and they get a small sample. It's usually a percentage of 1% of all calls, depending on the size of the organization and the calls they need to check. Other organizations do bring on a percentage of their agents actually do the samplings and checks to determine they are. Again, achieving a small percentage of them, but it is a spot check to kind of be able to determine, do they physically exist there and are they of quality? They also, in the other areas, that even though there may be a physical file on the recorder and eventually as it gets archived over, does it actually have content? You know, it's one thing to the recorder call reporting platform says, hey, you know, I've got a file, I did record it, it's all good. That big complicated call flow where everything transferred in and out, got supervisors in, brought this in, traded that, did this, put them on hold, transferred back, everything was good. Yes, there was a file, but it was only about 3K, but that whole transaction was about 30 minutes long. Is also an issue that the content actually, that there's nothing in the file regardless of their file. If we look at the passive automated testing, is to know that we're monitoring everything in real time, but what about making sure that as part of this, that the system is still up and running? Like we talked about the foundation at the bottom and all those health checks that you're probably doing inside of your organizations today. Automated testing is to be able to test the environment from a call outside all the way down to an agent trader endpoint and the call recording to ensure there's a recording really end to end. Doing this before the line of business contact center or trading floor opens up many times, you know, every hour, every 5 minutes, and giving your IT and VoIP infrastructure team the ability and time necessary to identify an issue, but also resolve it before the particular contact center trading floor opens up for business. So passive monitoring from that perspective, passive automated testing there. So when we look at this together and we step this right on top for both of those, the last piece in the last of the two of the three last pieces is really around, and we call it media integrity in our product, but what this really means to you and your organization is validating that it's retrieved, validating that it actually not only if it contains content, but is it just noise? Meaning it's gibberish or one-sided and it doesn't, you know, has one, you know, all that. But really determining if the media is if the audio is intelligible and audible. Could it be used in a legal court proceeding? And that is actually critical in determining it's not just exists, but could it be used? Can it be retrieved and used? Once you've gotten this as your ecosystem, you know, from our product is we do intelligent and actionable notifications. This isn't just basic alarming. This also is giving you information about, again, the word assurance, but is everything working as designed? Am I comfortable? I can wake up in the morning, everything's good. The trading floor or the contact center is operational. I know it's good. And if not, I can be notified in various different ways of not only what, but where I need to go spend my time to resolve particular issues to make it viable. The last piece in the equation is the risk and compliance audit reporting. Providing a series of data points through a series of reports about the system, how many calls were made, how many actually have been tested, how many have failed, how many moved to the archive, how many did not make it to the archive, which ones particularly did not make it to the archive, and for which agent and trader. These things are really designed for your compliance teams to be able to pool these daily, weekly, or whatever the business rules are to do that, and provide enough data points that the organization can notify the regulatory compliance authorities through their notification methods and paperwork and forms that a particular recording has been missed, including what remediations have been doing and so forth and why. So when you look at that, the compliance, risk and compliance audit reporting, and then again, you can see what do you guys do in your organization from this, wraps the whole thing together as an entire framework or an entire package. From there, we're gonna dive a little bit into the actual product itself, still at a high level, because you need to look at this. You can relate this to exactly what you're doing in your organization to achieve these various boxes here. So an assurance life cycle, when we really look at this, this is a 10,000-foot level. I mean, there are lots of servers and things that make up your call recording ecosystem in the environment, but we needed to boil it down a bit to make it simple for this. you have, and we're going to talk through this, you have quite an ecosystem, but if we look at this, the most critical components, we've got a voice infrastructure, we've got mobile bankers and financial folks, we've got agents and traders that need to be recorded, we have recorders, we have operational databases, we have archiving, long-term archiving, and a final data warehouse for reporting and validations at a high level. And then these call recording platforms have numerous other functions that are not necessarily that critical, such as translations of speech to text and things like that, and some PCI auditing for blanking out PCI information and things. And those are critical boxes, but we're going to look through the assurance of a particular, focus around a particular audio file itself. When we look at this, the first area is specifically around the unified communications and contact center monitoring, at the core here. The ACDs, PBXs, the session border controllers, the SIP proxy servers, the voice gateways, those kind of things all kind of make up one part of the transferring of voice through the ecosystem. Really monitoring the performance and availability, any fault information, firmware information, or any particular failures that could compromise a particular recording. So when you look at that, at the very basic, you got to monitor the audio area. That's what we're transferring. That's the basis of what we need to do. When we go through this, the next area here is really looking at the actual endpoints themselves. So either it's a mobile banker, or it's an agent trader that voice has been delivered in or out. How we're going to go that? Capturing all of the transactions that are going through there, the CDR, the RTCP data, looking at the RTP data, and understanding the actual endpoint themselves and the firmwares to ensure that the quality of the call is being delivered, and it actually is of quality, and so that at any point, if there was a garbled recording, if we know it was garbled at the onset of the audio and it wasn't the call recording platform, then IT organizations can focus their efforts specifically around the voice infrastructure or delivery down to the particular agent or trader, or depending on how the mobile banker has been set up in your organization, either proxied through or SIP proxied through to a telco, you can maybe determine where the problem may be a lot easier versus always blaming on the call recording, or just the opposite. Is it actually, it was perfect down to the mobile device, it was perfect down to the agent trader. From there, we can assure that everything was working good at that point, that the problem most likely could probably lean to the recorders themselves. Once we've gotten from there, we actually need to validate or verify the calls should have been recorded. We do that to determine if it actually is in the systems, both the operational database and the data warehouse. Does the call recording platform think that it actually has a recording for the particular transaction? Because one of these things in the previous step is not all contact centers or trading floors have very simple call flows. They can include very complex things where you are bridging other people into conferences, into conference bridges. You have supervisors, or they may be going to more than one person or transferring back and so forth. These things can cause the call recording platforms to get confused and drop the recording, or it could say that it actually thinks it has one, but somewhere along the line it did drop the recording. But we do check. So here's what do you do to check for every single recording actually is in the call recording platform, in addition to monitoring the call recording platform itself. From there, this is where we talk to single sort of source of truth, but more or less don't trust any individual thing as the source of truth, even though the databases may say that there could be recording in your environment. Is to actually validate, does it actually physically exist on the call recorder? And it can exist up there, as little as 10 minutes or as long as 24 hours, but does it actually physically exist, or does it actually have content? Can it be retrieved from the recorder, or is it corrupted and really can't be retrieved? And is it audible at this point? The reason you want to check from here is because when we look at the next stage is the archive. one of the most common areas that actually can corrupt or have recordings being lost is during the archiving process. It is sometimes that you can compress them and move them over to the long-term storage. That can change a little bit what's going on. There could be corruption in the saving on the storage. Things can happen in the network between these events, and therefore, when we get back to the last step, which is really at the archive, we want to say if the audio file actually changed. So we do the same checks. We can retrieve it. It has content. It's audible. If it is lost its audibleness or no longer contains content, or it is not actually physically there, at this point we know where the problem is it was from the logger to the archiving in that process. Now, when we take these steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, is what are you doing today? And you should ask yourself or ask your teams that you're working with, how are you achieving assurance in each of these areas in the life cycle in your organization to ensure that that recording, as it made it all the way over to the long-term archive, which I mentioned earlier, could be, you could keep that 6 months to a year, upward to 5 to 7 years, has actually been archived and has quality and can be retrieved at any point. And so when you look at that, these are some of the things that you can take back to your organization. Now, taking this as a whole, one of the things that we, IR brings to the table is not only the solution, end-to-end solution, but for those of you who want to know exactly how it all works and kind of gets into the detail, the great thing is that IR actually does has a pending international patent. And you can pull it up. Let's put it up here. If you need some reading materials, you can't sleep at night, and you really want to see what we're doing and what the brain is behind some of the heart of our matching engines and so forth, you can take an opportunity to pull this up and see exactly how we're actually doing this. This is important because that call matching, from you saw from 1, and I'll go back here, from 1, 2, and 3. Those call flows in your organization can be simple, point to point, or they can be very complex. And that the heart of Prognosis's call recording assurance as a product is to take all that people logic of tracking and putting it together and checking this and checking that, and actually automate the entire flow in real time and be able to perform these tasks. So when you look at this, it's really, you need to see how mature your organization is. Are you meeting your compliances? What tools do you have and people and processes do you have in place today? And if you're looking for tools and peoples and processes and things that you want to take on further, and how far you want to take it, the IR Prognosis's call recording assurance does have a solution to meet your need. So if you haven't asked, you saw Avaya, Cisco, and so forth in one of the slides, but what call recording platforms do we support? And we support quite a few of them, the big boys, the ones you would expect in this. And you should think, if you've got any of these in your organizations, we do support the Verance. We do support NICE, Interaction Manager, Engage. We support NTR. We support the Avaya Workforce Automation. So these are the primary ones, the big boys out there that are actually in your organizations, and you guys are either have one or many of these in your organizations, maybe by lines of business or functionality. We do support those, and they are tied into the core platforms where Prognosis does monitor the SBCs and the voice infrastructures and ties it together inherently in real time. So keeping this very high level, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity now to ask any particular questions and see if we can go through answering those in the environment. So let's hand this over to Stefano. What kind of questions have we come up in here?
Thanks, Travis. That was great. I'm not sure we've got a couple of questions. One around which of the global regulations really apply most in the APAC region?
Yeah, so let's go back to it's probably best to put this on the slide to show that answer to that question. It's actually a really great question. So when we look at for the APAC region, so one thing is Dodd-Frank Act impacts all financial institutions that are doing business in the United States. So if your financial institution is based in Asia-Pac, you are not exempt from the regulatory compliances if you are trading within the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or those things, or trading within the securities exchanges and so forth. You'll find that EU's compliances here will also affect those of you who are trading in Europe, are dealing with financial institutions, and PCI DSS also impacts Asia Pacific in particular. Very good question.
Okay, thanks, Travis. And we have one more question. What are the service level agreements around recordings?
That's a great question. In the risk and compliance, the service level is 100% record for every agent and trader that are dealing in insurance and financial compliances. There is no exception to a missing recording. It must be retrievable, must be stored and retrievable. Depending on the compliance, can go up to 7 years. Must be available, and so nobody gets a free card out of jail on that one. The SLA is 100% up. What we're seeing that some of these regulatory compliances, they actually went into law a few years ago. The grandfather time for the organizations to put measures in place are now running out, and now we're finding that some of these time clocks are starting in November and January and February and so forth, and they have to prove to the regulatory compliances they've put proper measures in place to meet the requirements within these compliances, and fines are now being proposed for organizations that have not met these remediations in time. Great question.
Okay, thanks, Travis. Yeah, probably that's the questions we have for now, so we might finish up, but please keep an eye out for any upcoming webinars and get in touch if you have any questions. Anything else from you, Travis?
No, it's great. Thank you guys for taking the time to attend, and please reach out if you have further questions about call recording assurance, how your organization's maturity is, and even what IR can do to assist around that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everybody for attending our webinar. See you next time.